Good evening, and welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. My name is Jim Karam. I'm the chairman of the board. I have the honor of serving as the chair of the board of the Institute. And I would like to welcome you all, and also welcome our special guest, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, for making the trip to Boston today, and Alison King from NBC Boston, who will serve as a guiding light for the senator in questions and discussions we will have later this evening. The Institute, as many of you know, has been open for about 2 years. In that time, we have hosted over 30,000 students from across New England and across the nation as they become senators for the day, learning about our government and the importance of civic engagement. Visitors who come through the doors debate, negotiate, and even vote on pieces of legislation inside this very chamber. Using handheld tablets as their guide, they explore our interactive exhibits that weave the history of the United States Senate together with Senator Kennedy's legacy of service and a call of our visitors to be involved in civic engagement. If you haven't had a chance to experience the museum, we encourage you to return to do so. We aim with every program to host and provide a platform for robust dialogue and debate on important policy issues and moments in our history, and tonight's discussion is no exception. But before we dive into the conversation, it is my pleasure to welcome our next speaker for the evening, co-founder and president of the board of the Institute, Vicki Kennedy, to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Vicki.
Thanks, Jim, so much. Thank you for your leadership. I appreciate your friendship more than I can say. We have so many special friends in the audience this evening: state elected officials, members of the 1787 Society, members of the Kennedy Staff Club, Jenny Littlefield. It's great to have you all here. I'm also thrilled that we're joined by another special guest this evening, my mother, Doris Reggie. Thank you so much for being here, Mom. And it's my great pleasure to join Jim Karam in welcoming all of you to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. I just love saying that. The Kennedy Institute was created to educate the public about the important role of the United States Senate in our government, to encourage participatory democracy, invigorate civil discourse, and inspire a new generation of leaders. With our distinguished speaker for this evening's Getting to the Point program, I believe we fulfill every single aspect of that ambitious mission statement. My late husband, Senator Edward Kennedy, used to say that all of us could make a difference, and each of us should try. He believed that public service was a noble profession that had the power to effect positive change in the lives of men and women in this country and around the world. Our distinguished guest this evening has spent a lifetime effecting positive change. As a young lawyer in the Rhode Island Attorney General's office, as counsel and policy director to the governor of Rhode Island, as the director of the Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation, as both U.S. Attorney and later State Attorney General in Rhode Island, and now as U.S. Senator, our speaker has lived a life of making a difference. In the United States Senate, he has tackled key issues facing our economy, the environment, healthcare. He's been a champion for education and criminal justice reform. His voice is a powerful one, here in New England and on the national stage. And he's never shied away from the tough issues, as evidenced by his new book, which he'll discuss this evening, Captured: The Corporate Infiltration of American Democracy. As one policymaker said, our speaker is an elected official who speaks the truth. It's my great honor and distinct pleasure to introduce him now Please join me in giving a warm Boston welcome to our fellow New Englander and my good friend, the Senator from Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Jim. It's great to be here, and it actually does feel kind of familiar. In fact, I could go back to my desk right there where the gentleman in the white shirt is sitting and feel right at home. Alison King is kindly here to help have a little conversation afterwards. So I will just speak briefly so that we can move on to that. But I do want to make 2 points here. The first is about why I wrote the book. If you don't know me, I grew up in the Foreign Service. My dad was a Foreign Service officer. My grandfather was a Foreign Service officer. My uncle was a Foreign Service officer. And I suspect my dad's brother would have been a Foreign Service officer, except that he was killed flying a Navy fighter plane over the Philippines in World War II, so he never came home. But I was brought up in that tradition, and 2 things really sank in very hard to me. One was, because we were posted in pretty crummy places, always around us were families who had willingly undertaken to go there. If you were bitten by a dog, it probably was rabies. If somebody got really sick, there was no credible hospital nearby. If the water wasn't boiled, you shouldn't drink it. And there probably wasn't milk or anything that needed refrigerating at all. And over again, American families decided that they would go there and do that. Why? Because something mattered about America that made it worth their while to leave the comforts and conveniences of home and even subject their families to risk and hazard because that thing mattered. And as I grew older and had the occasion to begin to talk to people from those countries, not just as a little kid, but as now a college student, it really became apparent that their view of us was also very different. You could fill the room with the French and the Germans and the English and the Russians and the Chinese and whomever, and America was held to a different and a higher standard. It mattered not just to us, that thing about America, it mattered to them. Wherever they were, there was something about the city on the hill. There was something about the lamp that made a big difference. And that has been baked into me. So when I came down to Washington and began to see and experience and read about and feel the distress and the dissatisfaction with the dysfunction of our American government, the thing that is supposed to be shining on that hill, right? Our alabaster cities gleam, it's supposed to gleam. And yet, even in our own country, it had lost its gleam. People were disappointed, fed up, frustrated. And that, to me, is heartbreaking, because if our lamp, in fact, does dim, that means a lot for our country and for the world. And if we dim our own lamp, that's a terrible circumstance. So I started trying to figure out what the hell was going wrong. And as I looked through the different parts of government that I've experienced over my years, and as I looked around what I saw from my seat in the Senate, it became more and more apparent to me that, to use a medical analogy, the problem with the United States is not a problem with the host. The problem is that the host has a virus. And if we can't distinguish between the virus and the host and treat the problem, the virus, we are going to do damage to the host. We're going to do damage to American democracy and its example. So the book goes through so many different areas in which the virus is at work. And the virus I would describe as concentrated corporate power that has made the decision that pursuing power and influence in government is its corporate strategy. It is a money-making proposition to control the wheels of government for the sake of the well-being of the industry. Most businesses don't do that, but there are a few that do, and they play hard and they play rough. You start with lobbying. We all get lobbied in the Senate. If you look at the big industries, corporate lobbying is $30 worth of lobbying expenditure for every $1 of everybody else in the world. That's not a competition. That's a blowout. And before you even get to where you're being lobbied, you have to win your seat. And to win your seat, you have to raise money or have money spent for you in this new post-Citizens United environment of dark money and unlimited money. So now you have this terrible situation of front groups with phony names like Americans for Puppies and Prosperity, with billions of dollars in dark money behind them. And because they are phony organizations, there's no restraint on them as to what they say. No restraint as to how negative and smearing it is. No restraint as to how untruthful it is. When you can barrage a democracy with false smears at an unlimited decibel level, there's a point where it stops being a democracy any longer. And so that's the problem in the electioneering side. And by the way, once you have the ability to spend that kind of money, particularly when you have the ability to spend it anonymously, guess what comes with that ability? What comes with that ability is the ability to threaten to spend that unlimited amount of money. And the threat has some great advantages. First of all, it's cheap. You don't have to actually spend the money. Second, it's secret. You can just go in and talk to whomever you need to talk to and say, you steer the hell clear of this issue, or we're going to put $10 million into the primary against you next time. You'll never see it coming. You'll never see our fingerprints on it, but I promise you, we will hang you from the scaffold. And then away they go, and nobody ever saw a thing. You move over to the administrative agencies of government, the regulatory agencies, and regulatory capture has been around so long that Woodrow Wilson wrote about it. And trust me, it's still alive and well. You move over to the judicial branch, which always used to be sacrosanct. And now you have the kind of display we saw leading to the Gorsuch nomination. You have business interest working very hard to control appointments to the court so they will rule in their favor. You have extraordinary measures being taken to educate judges once they are on the bench in the pro-business, deregulatory way of looking at the world. And you have a massive effort to continually push that idea to the court, particularly the Supreme Court, through amicus briefs, through this whole array of new courtiers who bring that message relentlessly. And if all of that weren't enough, the last thing that they have got is alternative facts. Not just the odd, weird, oops, caught me with my head in the cookie jar, try to make up a lie to get out of it type of dissembling, but an complex and very multiple tentacled infrastructure for deliberately delivering carefully calculated misinformation into the public arena. Of course, the most obvious piece of that is climate denial, which grew out of the tobacco health denial apparatus and then exploded when it had the fossil fuel industry's resources behind it. It was kind of funny in the old days. The tobacco folks put up something called the American Tobacco Institute. Wow, pretty tricky. But it was enough. People thought it was legit. They assumed it was science, so they let them kind of get away with pretending that tobacco, there was a question. There was a question. They said, doubt is our product. All they wanted to do was create that doubt so people would keep smoking. Move over to the fossil fuel industry, my gosh, it's like they went down the aisles of American history with a shopping cart and took the name of everybody credible off the shelf and stuck it onto a phony front group. There's the Madison group, the Jefferson group, the Franklin group, the John Locke group, the Cato group. The one that makes me particularly sick to my stomach is the George C. Marshall Institute. He was the organizer of victory in World War II. He was one of the great American heroes. He designed the Marshall Plan, and he never had children. So there's nobody to defend his name and to say, what the hell are you doing with my grandfather's name on your cheesy climate denial front group? So they run with it. So you put that whole array of things together, and of course the American people are furious. Who would not be? You can't get the things done that we need to get done because the stop from the big industries is there. And you're surrounded by phony information that comes from groups that nobody's ever heard of, that aren't real in any ordinary sense of that word. Some city on a hill. So that puts it on us to figure out how to fix it. And we can talk about that. I'll close my remarks with that. But my 2 points are, in a nutshell, this matters. This thing of ours, this thing of being American, this matters. And we should not sully it or diminish it or demean it ourselves. Bad enough if we let our enemies do it, but we should not do it ourselves. And the second piece is they are everywhere. And they're hiding. They don't want you to know that they run things. But the more you see it, the more you realize what's going on. And if the general public can reach this realization, nothing can undo the power of the American people when they have the information in front of them. So that's why I wrote the book. Thank you for giving me this time with you this evening, and meet you on the chairs. Thank you.
It is an honor to be here with you, Senator Whitehouse, who's really become one of the strongest voices in the United States Senate, whether it's his work on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which the subcommittee on crime and terrorism, which happens to oversee the FBI. Nothing interesting going on in that committee right now, right? No, I didn't think so.
And thank God I've got Lindsey Graham as my chairman, who is brave, smart, and perfectly happy to make inquiries into the Russian effort to elect Donald Trump.
We'll go back to that. Certainly on issues of climate change and, of course, when it comes to the intersection of money and politics, and I think that's where we're going to start right in. I just want to start out by saying that, and what I'm going to do is I have some questions that I'm going to ask, but I'm going to weave in some of the audience questions that you all submitted, and they were good ones, so we'll kind of weave that in as we go along. Senator, your book is very well written, I have to say. It's very well researched, it's really interesting, and it's depressing. That being said, it's a very important book, and I can't say I enjoyed it necessarily, but I certainly learned a lot. Obviously, the problems of money in politics, they've been building for decades. Yeah. I'm wondering if you think that the Citizens United decision was the tipping point that turned what was obviously a terrible problem for a long time into a crisis.
Without a doubt. I'll give you one example. When I got to the Senate, I was elected in 2006. I joined Senator Kennedy in the Senate in 2007. And through 2007 and through 2008 and through 2009, I was on the Environment and Public Works Committee then, and I still am today. Through those 3 years, there was a constant stream of Republican-sponsored climate change bills. John Warner, Republican of Virginia, Ted's dear friend, had a very significant climate change bill. Lamar Alexander of Tennessee had a climate change bill. Susan Collins of Maine had a climate change bill. John McCain ran for president in 2008 as the Republican nominee, carrying the standard of his party on a terrific climate change platform. We weren't solving the problem yet, but we were where you wanted to be in a body like the Senate on an issue as complicated as this. Ideas were being exchanged. People were talking. Hearings were being held. The proper legislative work of the Senate was grinding its way steadily forward with that heartbeat of bipartisan activity driving it on. January of 2010 was the day that Citizens United was decided. The fossil fuel industry asked to have the decision come down that way, anticipated that it would come down that way, and was ready at the mark as soon as the Supreme Court fired the gun. And from that day forward to now, there has not been one single piece of Republican-sponsored climate legislation of any significance. You could watch that heartbeat come to Citizens United, and then just like a patient died, flatlined for year after year. And the evidence wasn't going away. The facts of climate change weren't changing. What changed was the fossil fuel industry was given unprecedented political artillery to lay down suppressing fire throughout the Republican Party and get them to knock it off. Simple as that.
Well, lots of questions on Citizens United from this crowd, and here's one from Jeremy. He says, what do you think the chances are, and in what time frame, to passing an amendment overturning Citizens United, and are you doing anything specifically to achieve this goal?
We've worked on a couple of proposed constitutional amendments, and in the package of cleanup reforms that Democrats have supported in the Senate, we call the We the People package, a constitutional amendment to fix Citizens United is part of the package. As anybody who supported the Equal Rights Amendment for women knows, that's a long, slow, tortuous process. So the other thing that one can do right now, even without amending the Constitution, is to open up transparency into who's behind the money. Citizens United required that it be unlimited. It didn't require that it be dark. The darkness is a creation of politics, and we can solve it. The problem is that the entities and the interests that want to exert their power through dark money don't want their friends in Congress to take away that screen from them. So they fight harder to protect dark money than they fight on anything else, because it's the tool that enables all of the other mischief. So it's not going to be an easy fight, but with a motivated public, I think that is very, very doable. And I'd also strike, I think, one more note of optimism. I think the Supreme Court is at risk of losing its reputation as a honorable judicial body. The array of 5-4 decisions that they've run, the folly or virtual madness of the Citizens United decision when you actually take it apart, which I won't try to do here tonight, but it simply doesn't withstand knowledgeable scrutiny as a decision. And their reluctance to go back and fix it, even when they knew what their mistakes were, because they had played out in real life in public view on the front page of every newspaper, so they knew they had to be wrong, and still wouldn't go back and fix it. I think that there could be some hesitation on the part of the court. Even Justice Scalia, before he died, once said something along the lines of, "This has not turned out the way we expected, but don't blame us." Well, actually, I blame them exactly. But I do think that I hope that there's a growing recognition on the court that this is an Olympic error in the sort of Lochner-Plessy level of Supreme Court error.
You know, do Republicans and Democrats suffer, do one or the other suffer more because of the dark money and the corporate influence? Because there's there's a perception that all politicians are equally culpable, equally affected.
No, as one Republican friend said to me, I was trying to recruit him to join me on the disclose bill. And he said, well, Sheldon, you can't ask me to get on this bill right now. You guys are going to need to go out and raise a hell of a lot more dark money before it gets to be even, and then I think we'd all be willing to get rid of it. But while we're gaining this huge advantage from the dark money, why would we ever give that up?
Great. Okay, this is a question from Aaron that I thought was really interesting. How do you personally reconcile how much money you need to raise with not wanting to take corporate money? Do you still take those donations?
The regular campaign world is still pretty closely regulated. So you can take whatever it is now, $2,700 for your primary and $2,700 for your regular election. From a corporate PAC, you can take, I want to say, $10,000, and that's it. So in the scheme of things, where I think the last Senate race in New Hampshire cost $40 million, $5,000, $10,000 contributions barely even count. So that's part of this unlimited money problem, is that the power base has shifted from somebody able to go out and raise money bit by bit, talking to their friends and asking people for help, to these outside interests that can come roaring in with a $10 million expenditure. And that just dwarfs everything else. And in theory, those things are supposedly independent of the candidate. So there's a bit of a screen, kind of a fig leaf of a screen, to tell you the truth, between candidates and the super PACs and the big 501c4s. But it's actually taken the process of candidate campaign fundraising and made it almost ridiculous, because there's so really little that you can do, unless you're a celebrity. If you're Elizabeth Warren and can raise $5 million, in a quarter because you are Elizabeth Warren, that's a different thing. But for mere mortals, it's a long uphill slug in order to have it all blown away with an afternoon of one billionaire writing a check. And
you talked about these people that might be in in an office of a member of Congress and saying, you do this or I'll bury you, essentially. Have you gotten that person in your office, and what did you say?
No, because
they know better?
They know that I'm not going there. And their strategy has been more to try to control the Republican Party than to come and fight with us. If they can control, let's say, the fossil fuel industry, my favorite enemy, they don't really come after us. They will come after Democrats in close races where they think they can flip the seat and win one, and then they'll spend a lot of money. They'll probably be spending a lot of money to try to beat Heidi Heitkamp, and they'll probably try to spend a lot of money to beat Joe Donnelly. But where they really, really care is to have no defectors on the Republican side. Because if they can do that, then they can mask what is basically incredibly crummy, old-fashioned, tale as old as time, special interest, special pleading, as if it's some exotic new feature in the partisan culture wars of the United States. Oh, we can't deal with climate change. The Republicans and the Democrats, they can never get, it's too partisan an issue. It's not a partisan issue. There are probably a dozen Republicans in the Senate who would start working on a climate bill with me tomorrow if they could see a safe political pathway to getting there. But the fossil fuel industry is there with the gun to their head saying, don't you even think about it. And Bob Inglis is one of the perfect examples. I think he had a 100% conservative voting record in South Carolina. And he went down to Antarctica and took a look around and started asking scientific questions and decided, this climate change thing is real. They took him out in his next primary with a 2-to-1 vote. It usually takes an indictment to be taken out 2-to-1, but they just buried him. And as he said to me, we've become friends since this experience, they made my last name a verb in Washington. to be Englist, basically to be taken out. Voltaire, many years ago, when Admiral Byng was hanged by the British Navy, made a remark that has lasted for a long time, which is every once in a while those Brits have to hang an admiral just to encourage all the others. So being Englist is a little bit like that. They take one out and hang them just to encourage everybody else.
I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about your role as the ranking member of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism. What are your latest thoughts about the Trump connections, alleged Trump connections to Russia, and is what we're hearing just the tip of the iceberg?
Yes, what we are hearing is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm very grateful to Lindsey Graham for his willingness to do this. For me, doing these hearings is like walking down Broadway at Main Street with the, sun shining at high noon. For him, this is a kind of high wire act, and he's doing it anyway. So he's really, I think, doing noble work. Our first hearing was to look at the Russian toolbox of election manipulation, which they used first throughout the former Soviet empire, and then which they pushed down into the EU and into Germany and countries, France, Holland, that had not been part of their traditional empire. And then in this last election, they jumped the Atlantic and came and played in our election. Things like having 1,000 human trolls working full-time to pound Secretary Clinton with even crazy negatives. It doesn't matter what it was, as long as it could drive the traffic to the top of the Google search engine, to the top of the Facebook selectors. And they did a very, very clever job. And as Director Comey said the other day, they're not going away. They don't mind that they were caught, and they could perfectly easily come and do it again in 18 and then in 20 again. So we have a very important public service to do to educate the American public in how this works. And unfortunately, two of the worst things about our current state of political affairs, dark money and what I call the flying monkeys, the fact-free means for disseminating information, the National Enquirer, the websites that describe Hillary's child sex ring operating in the bottom of Cosmo's Pizza, all that kind of collectively is a bunch of lies and nonsense, but you hammer enough pressure through it and it begins to have an effect. And both of those things, both the dark money and the flying monkeys of fake news, are extremely amenable to being manipulated by Russians, Chinese, outside interests. So it's not going away.
What specifically is one of the most concerning aspects of all the allegations that are flying around to you?
The scariest allegation is that they have something on the president so that if they need to, they can control him. It is a well-established part of the Russian election manipulation playbook to find wealthy business people of moderate to low scruple who are willing to enter into business arrangements that are more or less de facto bribes, or to be bailed out of trouble that they're in financially, and to create that financial relationship with Russia or its front entities. And then once they have insinuated themselves into that relationship, they have control not only through continued bribery and financial manipulation, but through the ability to blow the whistle on themselves and the business leader and blow up the business leader's reputation as having been basically involved in this crooked scheme. And their cutouts are people that they don't mind hurting, so it's all good to them. And they select those people based on their likelihood of influencing politics or going into politics. So if you look at all those elements, they kind of point towards a Donald Trump type person as their ideal target. And the idea that with all of his business interests and his refusal to disclose his tax returns and other things that would lend some transparency into all of that, it leaves open the prospect that there is something about his business arrangements that the Russians know, that Putin knows, and that we don't, and that when push comes to shove, they're prepared to play that card, and he will have to fold because he doesn't want what they know known by Americans.
Just yes or no. Are you one who believes Donald Trump will not be around 3.5 years from now?
It would surprise me.
Okay. We're going to move on to climate change. Given your grave concern about climate change, how do you wrap your mind, given that it's, sort of part of your life work, basically, how do you wrap your mind around what's going on these days? And I specifically mean with the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's kind of torture. We really had the creepy little climate denial crew on the run. They had basically lost virtually all credibility, and they had retreated to the Heartland Institute and to the George C. Marshall Institute and to their phony, baloney little fossil fuel-funded redoubts, and they were finding more and more difficulty getting published or taken seriously. And now with this new administration, they've been put into positions of power. They've been pulled out of these creepy climate denial places and given the position of coordinating the transition for EPA. They're being considered for positions like the lead scientist at the Council for Environmental Quality. There's a almost perverse mockery of reality that is taking place, an unashamed and perverse mockery of this reality. And when we consider what the price is going to be of getting it wrong, the fact that they're so shameless about engaging in this mockery it kind of makes your head spin.
Have you met Scott Pruitt?
Yep. Yeah, he came through the Environment and Public Works Committee.
And do you think he is actively dismantling the agency and that is his marching orders?
I think he'd like to, but one of the nice things about regulatory agencies is that they don't have to do what the president tells them. They don't have to do what the administrator tells them. They have to do what the law tells them. So if there's a conflict between what the administrator tells them to do or what the president tells them to do, what the law tells them to do, they really can't budge much. And the second thing is that because of the transparency and openness of administrative fact-finding, it's really hard to run alternative facts and phony science through that process successfully. When Administrator Pruitt came to the Environment and Public Works Committee, one of the things that surprised me was that he said he was not going to review the endangerment finding for carbon dioxide, which is the key linchpin that will force the EPA to continue to regulate carbon dioxide. There is no escape once that endangerment finding is in place, and he said, I'm going to leave it in place. And I suddenly realized, of course he's going to leave it in place. The last thing he'd want to do is open up that question and get himself buried in the new evidence. They want to duck and dodge their way around it. They're cleverer than that, and they know what they're up against. These are, in my view, these aren't people who are sincere in their beliefs. They're paid to think certain things or to pretend that they think certain things, but they know that there's certain fights that they should stay out of because reality will crush them. And so they dodge those and go to places where they can be more evasive and successful.
Talk all evening, right, about climate change. I want to move on because we have limited time, and I want to ask you about Supreme Court Justice now. Neil Gorsuch. Democrats and many Americans really are outraged about how that all went down. But, is it fair to say that since he was replacing the conservative Justice Scalia, things aren't necessarily going to change so much in the court?
They will probably go back to status quo ante, which is regrettable because it was kind of nice to have the court at 4-4. Reverting back to a 5-4 Republican-controlled court will revert back to what brought us Citizens United and its related decisions. It will revert back to what brought us Shelby County and the decisions that stripped the protections of the Voting Rights Act and unleashed these southern states to attack Democrat and minority voters with what the Fourth Circuit called surgical precision. And it will continue the barrage of pro-corporate decisions in which if you go in as a consumer or as an employee who is the victim of discrimination or as somebody wishing to litigate a matter with a corporation, you could basically tell as you walked into that courtroom, based on who you were and who your opponent was, how the decision was going to come down, and that it was going to come down 5-4. That they were just going to automatically decide for the corporation. And that's a very unfortunate status quo to go back to. And we've gotten, I think, a little bit too acclimated to it. And one of the things that I hope is part of the upside of Gorsuch's confirmation is that if he does revert to form, people will now call the court out for this 5-4 behavior in a much more pointed way. They have gotten away with a lot of mischief, hiding behind the protection that the court has long enjoyed, that all of its decisions are to be taken at face value, all of its members to be treated as if they're fully on the up and up, and nobody should assign political motivations to anybody on the court. And in an ideal world, that would be true, but I think this emperor has long since lost his clothes.
All right, well, I want to do a little, I don't want to say rapid fire, but just some quick responses to you.
I'm a senator. Issues. We're not allowed to do that. The union doesn't allow it.
Do your best.
Okay.
Okay. Would you support Elizabeth Warren for president in 2020?
If she were the candidate, I'd gladly support her. I'm not making decisions right now about how that's all going to work itself out. But we'll have a great candidate and we'll have a great 2020 race.
Encourage her to run?
I think she's a very important voice. I am very fond of her personally, and I think she's an important and a powerful voice. And now that we know that Donald Trump can be president, everybody's qualified.
Who are your favorite? You mentioned Lindsey Graham.
Yep.
Besides Lindsey Graham, who are name 2 Republicans that you really enjoy working with or can work with?
Well, John McCain quite a lot. And Dan Sullivan from Alaska, and I have just done the first piece of marine plastic debris legislation that the Senate has ever done, after a very good bipartisan hearing and everything done, by the numbers. So they're actually a considerable number. The guy who I actually like working with the most, when we agree, is Jim Inhofe. Jim Inhofe is one powerful legislator, and by virtue of his credentials, if he's for it, everybody else feels very comfortable on the Republican side. When he's with you, he will move bills. He will get things done. Unfortunately, he's also my most inveterate adversary on climate change. So there's there are the two sides to Jim Inhofe.
On what issue do you see the opening for you personally to work with Donald Trump on something?
Well, there's several, but the biggest, obviously, is going to be infrastructure. If he comes up with a serious infrastructure bill that actually is infrastructure and isn't just tax dodges for super wealthy people, then I think all Democrats are willing to work with him on that. The second area that I would commend him to work on would be, look, you tried repeal and replace. You can't do it. It's not going to happen. You learned a lot about Medicaid and what people expect out of it. You learned a lot about people who didn't know that they were on Obamacare and suddenly discovered that they were and that they didn't want it to go away. Now, look on to the problems in the healthcare system. Don't try to solve what isn't broken. Try to solve what is broken. Try to get rid of hospital-acquired infections. Try to make sure that people getting end-of-life care are getting their wishes honored. Try to make sure that doctors are being compensated in a way that they can invest in keeping you healthy instead of having to wait to get paid until they have to do stuff to you when you're sick. Solve some of those problems, and people will be very, very happy that you have delivered in ways that matter in their lives.
What is the over-under on whether Steve Bannon is around in a few weeks?
Boy, it's hard for me to tell because I just am so offended that he's even there in the first place, that the difference between judgment and wish is rather a blur. But it's really hard to run a government when one of your top assistants is dedicated to the government not working, when he's dedicated to the enterprise failing. That is not a good way, whether you're running a big company or whether you're running a big organization. You can't have the people who report to you out to see the enterprise fail while you are in charge of it. And I think that is the fundamental problem with Steve Bannon, setting aside all of the alarming and extreme views that he brings to the table.
Who are you most impressed with in the Trump administration? Do you have like a go-to person that you would? No.
No, I mean, I think one of the things when the Trump administration was first being assembled, one of the immediate decisions that the Democratic caucus made, not formally, but we all, I think, kind of went in this direction, was that we were going to support building a cordon of grown-ups around the White House in the very significant national security positions. That was important for our national security so that people like Bannon weren't making really dangerous decisions. And in the military context, there's not a lot of separation of powers. There's not a lot of judicial review. There are very few checks and balances. So that was a particularly dangerous area. And I think General Mattis has done a very good job. I think he has stood the test of the pressure that's been put on him. I was really pleased when Bannon went over to tell General Kelly that he had to knock off protecting green card folks under the first executive order. And General Kelly told him, I don't see you in my chain of command. Go back to the White House. I'm sticking with protecting the people with the green cards. And so there's been considerable pushback in those and other areas from the cordon of maturity that we cleared to be in place around this White House. Just so you know, this has been such a wild administration that much of this stuff didn't get out. It would have been front page news for a week in the Obama administration. When General Mattis had his hearing in the Republican-led Senate Armed Services Committee, one of the Republican witnesses said that it was very important for us to confirm General Mattis and to get him in place quickly because he would defend against the wildly stupid, dangerous, and illegal decisions we could expect from the Trump White House. The witness's words, wildly stupid, dangerous, and illegal. That's what they're saying about their own White House at this point. So I think getting those people in place, although it caused the far left folks a lot of anxiety that we weren't voting against all the Trump appointees, was in the national interest.
You know, there were so many questions from this audience about what they can do and how they can get involved. Steve says, essentially, I don't need to influence my own Massachusetts senators. I need to influence senators from other states who have different views than I do. How do I do that? Young people saying, what can we do? I mean, I think there's a feeling that just, you know, writing your congressman isn't really doing the trick these days.
Well, follow the instruction of Barbara Mikulski, who used to sit right about there in the Senate before she retired, who is fond of saying, don't agonize, organize. So through social media, through whatever group, you know, organize. And then as an organization, you can work in other states. Support the groups that you care about, whether it's Planned Parenthood or NRDC or Common Cause or whatever it is. Get involved with organizations, because even if you can't be in the other states, the organizations you support will be. And then finally, 2018 is going to be a tough year for the Senate because of the map. We're probably not going to take back the Senate in 2018. But if the numbers we're seeing out of Kansas yesterday hold, there's a very good chance of taking back the House and having a Democratic speaker sworn in January of 2019. That changes everything in Washington. And as soon as we know who the 50 or 60 top swing races are, where we want to go in and defeat a Republican congressman and replace them with a Democrat, find those districts. They will be published by the DCCC. Run them against your book of friends. I'll date myself and say Rolodex. Run it for those zip codes and call them all up. And with any luck, there will be a very considerable wave of revulsion and energy and positivism all together. And I think it would be great to have, nothing could change things in Washington for the better more and more quickly than a Democratic speaker.
Okay, I have time, I think, for two more real quick questions.
Sure.
Make it quick, a few minutes. What's keeping you up at night these days?
I think of climate change in the context of where I began my talk, which is America is the city on the hill. And I think about the soft power that has accrued to the United States and served our interests for decades now because of what we represent in the world. And I think of the competition that comes from other ways of looking at the world. Everybody doesn't see the world through our American democratic market economy lens. There's a Putin way of looking at the world. There's a Chinese way of looking at the world. There's a jihadi way of looking at the world. There are kleptocrats who have another way of looking at the world. There are lots of different ways of looking at the world. And in that marketplace of ideas, generation after generation of Americans has done a good job of burnishing and polishing the American model. If people all over the world have lost their farms because the rains don't come any longer, have lost their fisheries because the fisheries all moved to cooler waters, have lost their homes because the sea level has risen through the entire province that they live in, and all of the turbulence that that has caused as people move around to avoid it has turned into violence and conflict, as our Defense Department predicts, then all of that pain, whether it's immediate pain to people at subsistence levels of farming or fishing, or those for whom the disruption is the thing that causes the pain in their lives, all of that pain is going to be looking for answers. Okay. And the answer is going to come home to roost with why America, for 30 years, knew about this problem, claimed to be a world leader, and refused to do a damn thing about it because it was too corrupted by one big special interest and wouldn't say no to them, even when we knew what we knew. That's the thing that keeps me up at night.
All right, well, I want to end on a more positive note, which is, I'm going to let you give a little plug for your book, but I have to say, the book is, you're really a student of history.
Yep.
And I found that to be really interesting, just a whole part of the book in general. But what do you, when people read this book, you want them to walk away from the book, what? Knowing something, doing something, thinking something?
I want them to walk away from the book with two things. One, the knowledge that the problem isn't the host. The problem is the virus, and this is the virus. We have let a class of influence seekers take over the operation of government in far too many ways. The second is that this is not a new problem. We have dealt with it before. Whether it was Thomas Jefferson in the 1820s writing about the newly arrived banks that he feared for the salvation of popular government at the hands of these moneyed corporations who already bid defiance to our government in a trial of strength, all the way up to Teddy Roosevelt, who actually won that trial of strength and passed the Tillman Act that stripped corporate funding out of our elections. This has been a recurring theme through our history and through all history of the influencer class trying to get control over government so it can suck benefits out for itself versus the regular people who just want to be let the hell alone and not have their government stolen too badly by the influencer class. I want people to understand that this is a fight that has been won before, and there's nothing that says that we can't win this again in our time and leave a legacy that our grandchildren will be proud of.
On that very hopeful note, I would like to say thank you, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Alison. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Mrs. Kennedy, for having us. And I want to let you all know that the book is being sold in the gift shop, and Senator Whitehouse is kind enough to be signing books in the lobby, and it will be open till 8 o'clock. So thanks again, all of you.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure being here.